Hi, how you doing? In this video, I'm going to try and change the way you think of a boxer from the pugilistic era. I think the reputation he has is entirely undeserved, and I'm going to put it straight. Owen Swift was a highly successful fighter at the end of the Broughton's Rules era of boxing. He was known as The Wonder and weighed in at only 9 stone, 130 pounds or 57 kilos. He had a prodigious amount of skill and vast amounts of bottom, and during his career he was said to have been involved in official bouts that caused the deaths of 3 men. He wrote the wonderful Handbook to Boxing in 1840, and as was common, retired from the ring to run a pub where he lived until he died in his mid-60s. However, there's a lot more, and in some ways a fair amount less, to Owen Swift than this commonly accepted brief summary would lead us to believe. Let's work through the timeline of his life and pull out the most relevant bits to show what he actually did and what sort of character he really was. He was born in 1814 in St Giles in London to Irish parents. His father was a plasterer, and so as a child he learned his father's trade. In 1829, aged only 15, he had 2 formal fights, against Tom McKeever and Jem Gypsy Cooper, and he won them both. He was also arrested, charged and imprisoned for the theft of a hat from a wealthy gentleman. The next year, in 1830, he lost to Tom Smith, the East End sailor boy, but later beat Bill Isaacs. He was arrested for his part in a drunken brawl outside the pub of Reuben Martin, another pugilist of note. During the brawl, a policeman sustained a fractured skull. In 1832, he beat Anthony Noon for the first time, followed by Tom Collins and Ned Brown. In 1833, he beat Jack Allen and then William Murray. A lot of sources claim that Murray went on to die from the injuries he suffered from this fight, but I've yet to see any actual proof of this. At the end of the year, he fought and beat Phil Isles. In 1834, he fought and beat Bill Atkinson and fought Anthony Noon for the second time. Noon did die from the results of the injuries sustained in the fight, and Swift was arrested for manslaughter, tried, found guilty, and spent 6 months in prison. In 1836, he only had one fight, which he lost, to the imaginatively named Hammer Lane. In 1837, he beat the Jewish fighter known as Lazarus, and then later in the year was arrested for being involved in a fight at a cookshop. All charges were dropped. In 1838, he fought and beat William Phelps, known as Brighton Bill, who, like Noon, some 4 years earlier, died from injuries sustained in the fight. Swift, realising he was likely to be sentenced more harshly a second time round, fled to France. While he was there, he had a number of fights, primarily against fellow Englishman Jack Adams, who accused Swift of cheating and fouling him and refused to fight him anymore. In 1839, he found himself on trial in France for disturbing the peace. He was sentenced to 13 months' imprisonment, but fled yet again. A number of the fancy negotiated with the French authorities on Swift's behalf and managed to arrange for him to stand trial in England. Swift returned to England and turned himself over to authorities in Hereford, which is, in fairness, about as far from France as you can get without crossing into Wales. The next day, he stood trial and pleaded not guilty to the manslaughter of Brighton Bill. The trial was, not to put too fine a point on it, a complete farce. Swift arrived at court having painted his face black so he couldn't be recognised. However, the counsel for the prosecution and all of the witnesses failed to appear. And so, regardless of his creative efforts to make his identification impossible, there was no one who could reliably say he'd even been present at the fight where Brighton Bill died. So the judge threw it out of court. Later, the same year, a woman by the name of Julia Pearl turned herself and her 3 children into a workhouse on Marlborough Street after Swift, the father of the children, had abandoned them and their mother to marry another woman. When asked why she'd not approached him for financial support, she claimed she was too scared and that he would beat her again. Her nose had clearly been broken several times and her face bore several scars from previous beatings. In 1841, Swift was arrested along with 9 other men for assaulting the police who were trying to prevent a boxing match taking place. The fancy intervened and the case never made it to court. In 1850, he took another man to court for assaulting him. The case was dropped. In 1852, he was once more up in front of the bench, this time for punching a man in the face. He claimed the man used foul language and so his actions were reasonable. The judge agreed, and he was acquitted. In 1879, he died, and his obituary said, "The death of Owen Swift would have been considered an event of some importance had it taken place 20 years ago." It would seem that whatever fame and positive reputation he had as a fighter had long faded. But regardless of his criminal life, he still wrote a wonderful book, didn't he? Well, no, probably not. In 1843, he was in court yet again, this time to do with a case of stakeholders at a match withholding money. Under oath, he swore that he knew nothing of the rule which allowed them to do so. The opposing counsel then pointed out that the rule he claimed to know nothing of was published in his very own book, which had come out some 3 years earlier. So it seems unlikely that he did in fact write the book with his name on. It was relatively common practice even back then for books to be ghostwritten, or even for a more famous person's name to be used as that of the author in exchange for a share of the revenue. So I've deliberately avoided any judgment on Swift. I want you to infer what you will from the facts, but I don't think I can finish this video without a quick summary. Swift was indeed a successful fighter, and one who had a decent amount of success. But he was also a thief, a thug, a cheat, a liar, a wife-beater and a bigamist. And had it not been for the interference of some of the more influential members of the fancy, who were clearly benefiting from his abilities in the ring, he likely would not have stayed out of prison half as much as he did. Yes, there's a great book with his name on it, but according to the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, it was actually authored by Renton Nicholson, a successful author who also apparently wrote Swift's memoirs. So, over to you. What do you think? Did you have an opinion on Swift before this video? Has anything I've said changed your mind? Or did you already know what a piece of work he clearly was? Stick something in the comments and let me know. And to those of you still here at the very end of the video, fight team!